At this point in your self-education, you should have an idea of the basic clearances you can issue. Takeoff clearance, a landing clearance, an instruction, and hopefully also a hold short instructions and some kind of management. Elaborating on this and taking the next step is what we need to dig into now. Not just the specific clearances, but the procedures you need to employ to manage your frequency. This is a very important topic that's going to follow you all the way to your checkout. We'll break this briefing into two different parts, a part of managing your scope and a part of dealing with some various techniques, clearances, and procedures. Let's start with part one. What do we want to accomplish? A safe, efficient frequency with full control over the situation. There are many good techniques on how to do this. For this course, we will say that it can be merged into three priorities that we would like to use. First of all, ensure safety and separation. This is undebatable. You have to always know your priorities to make sure what everything that's going on is safe. It's about knowing what is important and when it's important. You can never, ever make an excuse to compromise safety, and that's really how you fail at checkout. Secondly is keep a dynamic and steady workflow. This is about knowing what goes on around you, about being ahead of the picture, about knowing what comes next, and this is being done by establishing a good situational awareness. Third one is avoid confusion and enhance efficiency. This is about choosing your words, your phrases, your clearances correctly, and in a manner that really avoids ambiguity, as well as being aware of what time do you have in between your clearances to manage other things. So, okay, let's start with the first one. Ensure safety and separation. This should really be a no-brainer. This you achieve by knowing what can actually endanger your safety. An ATC clearance, for example, does not really bring any danger with it, as it's requested by a plane standing still with the engines off on stand. A landing clearance, this has really potential safety precautions. It's about knowing your priorities. One is go-around instructions, very important, and that's all normally done because another airplane may be on the runway. This would take complete priority. Landing clearances, because we're talking to airborne airplanes here, they can't just stop, so we're also limited on time. We basically have from here to make sure he has his clearance, so it is very time sensitive. Takeoff clearances, an aircraft standing on an active runway and awaiting departure, potentially could be also blocking a landing airplane. This takes quite a bit of priority. Taxi clearances, people taxiing around and must be cleared in a way as not to taxi into each other. Sometimes, actually, you need to put this above the takeoff clearance if you see a potential conflict unfolding on the ground. Again, it's about ensuring safety and separation. You need to play around with these things. Pushback clearances, pilot is standing still and can wait, so not really a super high priority when talking about safety. And ATC clearance, well, yeah, he can wait. This is a very basic understanding of priority groups. From here on, you need to switch them around depending on what your situation is. If you talk about safety, then it needs to be like this. But if you've done your job well and safety is not an issue, then maybe sometimes a pushback clearance can be important because there are 4 other airplanes waiting behind to push as well. And the guy on landing might still be 10 miles away and giving you plenty of time to give that landing clearance later. That's why it really boils down now to the second point. Keeping a dynamic and steady workflow through situational awareness. So what is that? Well, situational awareness is everything when you control. What is it? Well, it's about being ahead of the moment. It's about knowing exactly what goes on around you. When you have 7 airplanes active on your scope, it's about knowing who they are, the call signs, knowing that if someone calls for taxi, that you know where other taxiing airplanes are going so that you can clear him in order not to create any conflicts, these kind of things. You wanna be ahead. Because one of the biggest reasons that people falling behind is silence on the frequency, or more specifically silence because you don't know who is calling and you don't know what he wants. Because you see, in a busy situation, a moment of silence as you pan around to figure out who was just calling is a moment where other pilots can interrupt and come with their requests. Now you have a backlog that you need to catch up, and as you struggle to get back with all the other calling, you have a break in silence and more calls up, and you sink more and more behind. This is why you must master your situational awareness, which we can say is very simplified is who are active on your frequency and where, what are the call signs, so that you can recognize them immediately. What is the next stage of their flight and when can you expect it? For example, if you give pushback to Finnair 155, You know that he will call for the taxi next, meaning that you're prepared for when you hear the call sign Finnair 155. You will know what he will say, and you also may have an idea of what route you're going to give him. It's all about knowing who's going to enter your frequency. Let's take another example. Caterapon Scandinavian 932 with you. Now, who was that? You don't know. Your workflow is completely interrupted. You are scrolling around your scope to find out who it was, and finally, you found him there. There he is. But you wasted a lot of time. You probably had other pilots calling you while you were desperately trying to find 932. And now, because you were not ahead, you are now behind. However, if you had zoomed out and you knew not just who he was, but where he wanted to go, you already had a mental picture of which taxiways to use, what potential conflicts happen along. This is the way you need to do it. You have to remember, controllers don't just make up any answer when the pilot calls up. The good controllers, they already have a rough idea where the pilot needs to go and what the pilot is even trying to tell you before he calls up. Now that's a situational awareness. Time is also a part of it. This part is with enhancing efficiency. As mentioned earlier, the less wasted time you have on frequency, the better. And this you manage by using the frequency time to your advantage and always knowing what kind of time you have available. Let's take another example. Red Nose 3096 is requesting taxi, and you give him taxi 2 holds short of runway 30. Now, you need to have a mental timer started. He has been taken care of from here to here. Now, that would give you, let's say, around 20 seconds. Meaning you have 20 seconds to take care of other traffic or give other instructions before you have to return to Red Nose 3096 again to give him further instructions to cross the runway. You can't think about this, but it's kind of a mental feeling that you need to develop, knowing how much time you have before you need to deal with a certain situation. The 20 seconds may give you time to, let's say, give it inbound taxi instructions, and small instructions to Finnair there to hold short of Yankee, because due to the inbound. Again, having your internal timer ticking, maybe thinking that both Finnair and Red Nose need further instruction at the same time, so maybe let them follow each other. Then we squeeze another taxi clearance in, and there we are. Time is up, and it's time to do something about that situation you're planned for. Instruct Red Nose to cross the runway, move straight along to Finnair, instruct him to follow Red Nose. The clock starts ticking again, the whole thing starts over. Learn to use your time. Now, when it comes to confusion, there are basically two entities in kind of a rope battle. You want to be as efficient as possible, but not to the extent that you give so many instructions that you confuse pilots and make just life more difficult for yourself by having endless amounts of please repeat last transmission and airplanes taxiing the wrong taxiways and all stuff like that. This is also explained by an example, very commonly used one. Jetson 432 is vacating and he needs to go to Alpha 26. Now, he needs to go this way. How can you be most efficient, you think? Well, okay, I'll just say Jetson 432, taxi, Bravo, Charlie 30, Kilo 2, Kilo, Juliet, 2, Stan, Alpha 26. That was a long clearance, and he will ask you to say it again. Then taxi down the wrong taxiway anyway, and it will just be a mess. So what you can choose to do is to say Jetson 432, taxi via Bravo and Charlie, hold short runway 30. Now you got him covered for about 60 to 90 seconds, and then you give him the second part of his clearance as he's approaching runway 30, and you will make sure he follows the correct routing and that there will be no mistakes. This was just an example, of course, but there are many ways of doing this. You need to balance all the factors like pilot experience, complexity of the instructions, the time available you have, other potential conflicts you need to deal with, all this to maintain the best possible efficiency tailored for the situation. Confused? Does it seem like a kind of a tall task? Well, it is. And it's why this briefing is not really to teach you to do it, but to help you prepare to expect it. Mastering this thing, that's a training matter that will take you all the way until you are ready for your checkout. Phew. Okay, now onwards to part 2. Here we will just lay down a few things regarding some stuff that are generally pretty difficult for students. It's about conditional clearances and it's about non-standard ATC clearances. Conditional clearances are type of clearances you give to the pilot when you want him to execute this in the future after a certain condition has been met. This is a way to maximize time on the frequency and to ensure that everything is flowing forward. The way it works is you say a condition, which is uttered as behind, Then you need to specify what it is behind of, meaning describing a way the pilot can recognize this. Normally, that would be the aircraft type. The airline might not be such a great idea, as other pilots may not be able to see the airline with the model matching on VATSIM, so try to stick with the aircraft type. Main exceptions to this rule, by the way, is when it's an airplane from the same company, in which case you can hear the controller saying behind company. Then you need to state the clearance, or instruction, to the pilot. The most commonly used situations will be light-up instructions, very frequently needed, very easy to use. Taxi instructions, when you want someone to taxi behind another aircraft ahead of time. And pushback instructions. Now, after this, you will now need to repeat the condition, which is behind. Now you have the correctly structured conditional clearance. Condition, clearance, condition. Now, an important lesson is this. You do not need to show an examiner you know this for your checkout. This is a tool to optimize your traffic flow. Hence, do not use it just to use it, but use it so it makes sense. And by this I mean, don't give a conditional clearance if the condition is already gone, like a lineup instruction behind an aircraft that's already way down the runway. At the same time, don't give instructions so far in the future that there can be any doubt whatsoever that the pilot will be able to adhere it or miss it entirely. A conditional clearance should optimally not contain a condition that's not resolved in more than 10 to 15 seconds in the future. Otherwise, I promise you it's just going to bring problems. Now, the next thing is a non-standard ATC clearance, and this confuses a lot of students, which is why we are going just to have to break it down. Non-standard ATC clearances, which are not really non-standard, but it is to us, it refers to when you don't have an SID to assign the pilot, but instead we have to form a clearance on what we want him to fly. This is normally used in regional airports that don't have SIDs. It's used in Copenhagen and Billund when an aircraft is not able to fly an SID, or just doesn't have a route to support it. Now, I bet you earlier that you saw this table, which is taken from the ICAO, Doc 4444, which highlighted how to give a clearance. From this, we gave what we have, maybe a little incorrectly, but labeled standard ATC clearance, what we're used to giving on VATSIM. Call sign, clear to destination, via the so-and-so departure, knowing that that would include the cleared level, and then lastly the squawk. And we then just disregarded this whole last point because there was not really anything to say about what to do after departure, since it's all in the SID. Now, to do this now, we're going to keep the same structure, but we substitute. So let's take it again here. Call sign is the same, Scandinavia 123. Clearance limit's the same, London. We say via, and now, what is it via? Well, it depends on the pilot's flight plan. The common scenarios you will see, and it could be something else as well, but the most common ones are a flight plan which looks normal and long, but has no SID, a flight plan that's so short that it only has 1 point, which is not an SID point, or a flight plan which just simply has no points. The first scenario, which is the one you're normally going to see in regional airport like Roskilde, Aalborg, or Aarhus. Since they have a complete flight plan, you would say via flight plan route. They're cleared via their flight plan. In cases where you maybe want to fly them to a point first, like this one here, a very common one in Aalborg, where the first point is Alpha Lima, but it's very close to fly and it doesn't really make sense, then you can say, in this instance, via Ritzi, then flight plan route, or as filed. You are specifying to the pilot to fly the route he has filed, or to a point on that route, and then from onwards there as filed. That's it. The second scenario, that's just when you have a very short flight. Now, this could be, for example, from Copenhagen to Roskilde. The pilot has only Romeo Kilo in his flight plan, the NDB in Roskilde. And here you're going to say that you're cleared via Romeo Kilo. This may seem pretty much the same as the flight plan route, and it is. But it's used quite oftenly, and it's very widely used in this scenario, which is from Aalborg to Copenhagen. Pilots are normally filing from Alpha Lima, then via an airway to Tesby. Here the controller just may want to change their flight plan and just have them go via Tesby directly. Hence, the pilot will only fly 1 point, hence clear to Copenhagen via Tesby. Now the third scenario, this is when there are no points at all. For example, let's say from Copenhagen to Ängelholm in Sweden. Here you're going to need to provide vectors to the pilot, otherwise how will he know where to go? Then you will say clear to Ängelholm via radar vectors. Now, be very careful with this. Asking a pilot to fly a radar vector after departure and clearing him via radar vectors to a destination is not the same. Cleared via radar vectors is when the entire route is being flown on vectors, like this one would be. So, cleared via flight plan route, cleared via whatever point, cleared via radar vectors, so far so good. Next point, flight level. You need to, of course, provide the correct initial climb as agreed on with approach. Make a suggestion to approach, you can always agree or change it. And then, of course, the squawk. Then you have the last part, which is after departure instructions. So this is kind of just something new extra that we don't have in the normal clearance. And here it is when you have to specify what the pilot needs to do immediately after departure. This could be after departure maintain runway heading, after departure proceed direct to whatever, after departure follow standard noise abatement procedure, whatever the pilot needs to do directly after departure. So now it's all finished, and the clearance of Scandinavia 123 clear to Heathrow via Lango 2 Alpha departure, squawk 7334, becomes Scandinavia 123 clear to Heathrow via flight plan route, flight number 70, squawk 7334, after departure, fly runway heading. Hopefully this makes sense. The next thing, just here to the end, is how do we choose what to clear via? Which option do you select and what climb option after departure? Well, you don't. Approach does. Or whoever is controlling the approach airspace does. He will probably tell you these two things, the climb and the departure instructions. This part here, the whether to be via flight plan route or vectors or whatever, you can normally decide that for yourself based on the flight plan of the pilot. If there are certain scenarios where you may be in doubt, you can also just go ahead and ask the approach controller. A small tip, sometimes approach will be very, very busy and he may not have the capacity to actually figure out what clearance to give, and he might appreciate if you come up with a suggestion. So a very good conversation would be tower to approach, go ahead. Scandinavia 123 to Heathrow with no SID. Can I give him flight plan route, runway heading, flight level 70? And approach, he will be happy. In any case, if the approach will either approve your suggestion, or if he has something else, then he will come up with another clearance, but that's on him then. So hopefully this will help you. I know it's just a lot of things, and hopefully you caught it all. Otherwise, you can read about it here in the next chapters. You can see the video again if you need to. Thanks for watching.